On the phone is Daniel Levy. He is the director of Middle East European Council for Foreign Relations and a senior fellow at the New America Foundation. Daniel, can you hear us?
I can hear you, Sam. Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you. You're joining us from the UK, and apparently, phones work across the oceans now.
Amazing, right? Amazing.
Yes.
I thought we would do this by carrier pigeon.
Well, that's always an option here for us, but much rather prefer this. So, Daniel, thank you so much for joining us. Let's start. Obviously, let's start in this very narrow conflict that has taken place over the past couple of weeks, I guess, between Israel and Hamas and other forces in Gaza. What has precipitated these strikes on Gaza?
Look, there was an escalation there. There's almost been a set of understandings, sometimes more formal, sometimes less formal. It's almost like a tariff bar. If Israel does X, it's expected that the groups in Gaza will respond by doing Y, and vice versa if they initiate and do X. It's been largely kept in a box the last 4 years, albeit these haven't been good years. There have been 271 Palestinians killed and 3 Israelis killed since the last major operation. There was a mini escalation. A Palestinian civilian was killed. There was rocket fire. Another Palestinian killed, more extensive rocket fire. And then it seemed to be dying down. We seemed to be put it back in the box. There were a set of understandings. And then the Israeli Prime Minister decided to launch a larger offensive with the assassination of this military leader of Hamas, this Jabari, and with a series of air raids, and the expected response came with the rockets. Why now? I think there's a variety of factors. Some of them to do with Hamas and their calculations, but I don't think Hamas was planning for it to go this far. So I think the immediate decision to take this to a whole new level was taken by the Israeli Prime Minister. He's the one who decided to escalate this to a new level. And I think that has to do with both politics, the Israeli election, and to do with the situation in the region, where I think he wanted to lay down a marker and make the statement that even in the new regional circumstances post-Arab Spring, Israel would still have a free hand to do things like this.
Okay, and now what of the reports from Gershon Baskin, who apparently was engaged in some type of liaison between the Israelis and Hamas in terms of attempting to negotiate some type of truce? He's written a piece. I think one was in the Daily Beast. I think he's had a couple of other op-eds suggesting that Jabrim at the time was Jabari, I should say, had and was contemplating a new truce agreement that had been delivered, I guess, by parties in Cairo. What of that?
Well, I mean, there are constant channels of communication. I know people who just kind of look at the immediate surface news may think, oh, well, obviously the only way Israel and Hamas communicate with each other is in violent ways. But there are ongoing channels of dialogue and communication, mostly indirect, between Israeli officialdom and Hamas officialdom. There have been a series of understandings over the last years. Sometimes those have been more formal, sometimes more informal. And I think this was another episode in that. There was a significant lull in the fighting before the Israeli assassination and set of bombing missions. So I don't think Israel and Hamas were about to sign some great breakthrough far-reaching set of understandings. I don't think that's on the table. I don't think that's where either party is at right now. Certainly not the Israelis on the eve of an election, and almost certainly not under the Netanyahu premiership. But were we going back to the more limited but effective ceasefire arrangements reached in the past? I think that part of the Baskin claim is very credible, and that's very likely where we were on the eve of this Netanyahu escalation.
Baskin also characterizes Jabari as at least functioning in that sort of, I don't want to call it theater, obviously, because it has much more sort of serious implications, but this notion of where there were certain parameters in which a retaliation on both sides would take place, that Jabari was able to clamp down on the more radical elements within Gaza, the Salafists and the Islamic Jihad. Is that characterization accurate? And if so, what happens now? Is there forces in Hamas that have the ability to tamp down those more radical factions?
Look, this is one of the problems that we face right now. If there's going to be a serious effort at some kind of truce, some kind of cessation of hostilities, which is that Jabari was, by all accounts, an important actor in achieving these kinds of de-escalations in the past because, as you just said, Sam, he was able to work with those different factions. So one of the byproducts of Israel deciding that this was the time to take out a particular guy with an extrajudicial assassination means that you don't have him there to play that role. Is it possible that others could step in and fill that role? It's certainly possible, and it's probably even likely, but it just makes things more complicated. The two things I think that's important to understand in this aspect of it is that, first of all, Palestinians in Gaza are pissed. They are angry. They have been living under kind of blockade conditions that have only been slightly eased for several years. Israel controls the airspace. Israel controls their sea passages, their territorial waters. The closure imposed on the Egyptian side of the border has only eased a little since the change of regime in Egypt. And of course, Israel still maintains a regime of allowing in only agreed list of items and not allowing real reconstruction to take place. And there's a tunnel economy. So the alternative to Hamas in Gaza is not teddy bears. It's more likely to be people who want to take a more active military approach to trying to address the situation they are in. I'm not saying that justifies rockets against innocent civilians. That's a violation of international law, but that's the dynamic in Gaza. So you need to be able to bring those people along with you if you're going to maintain a ceasefire. The other important point to understand about Hamas is that it's not atypical to have a political movement in a liberation struggle that also has a military wing. You had it with Sinn Féin and the IRA, you had it with the ANC in South Africa, Umkhonto with Siswe, the military wing of the ANC, and you have it with the Hamas movement and their military wing. The advantage of disciplined political movements with military wings is that you can cut political deals with them because they are not in the business of violence for violence sake. They are in the business of seeing violence as one method through which they try to advance their struggle. It's difficult for them to rein in the others, but of course Hamas is a political address.
So Daniel, I mean, with this understanding, and with the understanding that as you deprive people of amenities in Gaza, obviously it radicalizes the population. Also, from a practical standpoint, like you say, there's a tunnel economy, so you're building the infrastructure essentially to bring more weapons in there, and you you refer to the Jabari killing assassination as the byproduct being that you have now sort of, at least for the time being, short-circuited that relationship between this political entity and its military wing, which can be negotiated with because it has a political wing, as opposed to some of these more radical groups. What is the strategic? What are the strategic goals here? I mean, it seems to me that there is absolutely no outline or vision for how this could in any way ever bring peace. I mean, I'm not saying that there is a legitimate use of force to bring about peace, but at least sometimes we hear that articulated. It doesn't even seem to be lip service to that.
Look, I agree with you, Sam, and search me for the strategic thinking behind this. I'm going to go out on a limb here and guess that if you had Prime Minister Netanyahu on the show, he wouldn't give a very convincing answer to what is the strategic goal here. If I were to try, I would say the following. One of the things that Netanyahu, I think, wants to achieve is to be able to say that in the new environment in the Middle East, Israel will still act aggressively, assertively, and initiate military operations at a time and in a way of its choosing, and that has been the way that Israel has dealt with living in that neighborhood, to make sure that people know that Israel can go crazy, so to speak. Israel will not flinch from using the fact that it has, in no small measure thanks to the United States, a significant military edge over all of its neighbors put together. How do you get from there to ever living in peace in the Middle East when you are vastly outnumbered by Muslims and Arabs surrounding you, by people who see as co-religionists and as brothers and sisters of a similar ethnicity, the Palestinians? How does that offer your people, your country, any future other than living by the sword in perpetuity? How is that a good strategy for the Jewish people? That's where it all falls short. If you want to if you have a broader approach that says, look, we got to live in this neighborhood, but sometimes we got to get tough. But that's not what they're doing. The occupation continues. There is no effort to come to terms with the 20% of Israelis who are Palestinians and to offer them genuine partnership in an Israeli democracy. There's no effort to come to terms with the Palestinians under Israeli occupation. There's no effort to come to terms with those who were made refugees as a consequence of Israel's war of independence, many of whom live in Gaza itself. And by extension, there's no effort to come to terms with how is Israel going to build peaceful relations with democratic neighbors. When these were authoritarian states, they could pay lip service to the Palestinians, but essentially do nothing. Now the pressure is, and you see that already in the last 96 hours, the pressure is on more democratic, more accountable Arab leaders to do more. And that's why I would argue that this is very high stakes risks that Israel is taking if it doesn't fundamentally think about how to reposition itself in the neighborhood. But I don't see the strategic forethought here at all, Sam.
How does this play out in terms of, I mean, I'm curious, obviously, I think Egypt is implicated significantly in this, and I think that's what you're getting at to a certain extent. But I'm also curious, it seems to me over the years that you and I have spoken that two things that I have noticed. One, the Israeli people seem to have even less of an appetite for some type of negotiated settlement. And two, that the United States has become a malignant factor in this dynamic. I mean that we saw the Bush administration pushing Israel in certain directions and not pushing back on Israel, specifically their incursion into Lebanon. It seems to me that the U.S. is completely sidelined now in some respects, and to the detriment. It's no longer providing the Israeli government with any type of leverage in which to push back against its own domestic populations, feeding its domestic politics. And there seems to be less inclination on those domestic politics to be fed any type of negotiation.
No, look, absolutely. First of all, if you are fed, and there's often talk of incitement on the Palestinian side, and sadly some of that is true. But on the Israeli side, if you are fed a narrative of what these people are about constantly, if you can imagine an America that never moved on from the post 9/11 scaremongering Iraq war, neoconservative nonsense, but that just kept getting deeper and deeper entrenched. And if you can imagine that the folks who were behind that, if they were driving a consensual narrative, imagine where America would be. And now think of how long Israel has not had an effective alternative voice. It's not like in the States where it took a few years for the Democrats to find their footing, to be able to push back against the Iraq war, push back against at least some of the nonsense, and we're still not there yet, of the global war on terror and the neoconservatives. You haven't got that in Israel. And so what you have is a narrative becoming ever more deeply entrenched that is reflected in the leadership, and it's a symbiotic relationship between where the public is at and where the leadership is at. And sometimes societies do go through very dark phases. And this gets at what you were talking about, Sam. And you're encouraged in your worst tendencies by the external actors. So Israelis feel vindicated because Netanyahu is able to turn around to them and say, you guys thought I had a problem with this guy Obama and we weren't on the same page? Look at what just happened. I basically poked him in the eye as often and as blatantly as I could throughout his election campaign. But the moment I went in and started an operation against the Palestinians, he stood with me. He phoned me the same night. We're on the same page. There's no clear daylight between us. So Israel has its very worst tendencies reinforced by, unfortunately, not just a Bush America, but also by the current president, who really should know better.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that it is a clear sign that he's worried that in the event that, I mean, I without trying to divine what his real perspective is,
Right.
that he wants to maintain some type of capacity to get through some domestic agenda, and he's just basically abdicating any role in getting involved in this conflict.
And look, there may be other things playing into this. I'm sure that he has people who are able to give wise counsel, who on this issue would say to him, well, Mr. President, if you show that you're supportive on day one, then it allows you to lean more on the Israeli Prime Minister on day 5. And if you go easy with them on this issue, then maybe you can put some credit in the bank to come back and revisit the settlement issue or something like that, and listen to what sensible Israelis like the defense minister and the president say. It's a misunderstanding of where Israel is at. And Israelis, unfortunately, have grown very used to there being no cost or consequence for actions that, in other cases, would lead them to question their leaders' policies. And America is crucial to there being no costs or consequences, crucial to an Israel that believes it can continue down this path with impunity. And that is terribly irresponsible by the United States towards Israel, of course, also towards its own interests and its own relations in the Middle East, because people are not going to, Arab leaders who have to be more accountable to their publics are not going to be willing, are not going to be able to afford to act like Mubarak and to basically humiliate himself on this issue every time by going along with the American diktat, sometimes very enthusiastically. So people haven't changed disc yet in the United States. I hope that this has more to do with immediate post-election fiscal cliff congressional priorities for President Obama, and it's not just a fundamental misreading of the conflict. But I'd love to see more by way of reassurance on that.
Well, Daniel, I know that you have to run. Let me just one final question. To the extent that there is any type of outside pressure that can come, that can begin to impact Israel's behavior and provide some type of backstop in some respects, do you see any of what appears to me to see, a Brown University, for instance, is at least talking about divestment from companies, American companies that are doing business in the occupied territories in the West Bank. Do you see any hope that a movement like that comes from the sort of the United States people can have any long-term impact?
I'm all in favor of people taking the power that they have as citizens, as consumers, as students, as investors, and saying we're going to take a stand. And I do not see how anyone who claims to support a democratic Israel that is not in permanent occupation, how anyone who supports a democratic Israel could take offense at the idea of not investing in companies that invest themselves in the occupation. I fear that the trajectory, how long it will take for those things to really have an impact, especially when there is such a forceful pushback by far too much of the mainstream Jewish establishment, who really should know better and should be acting more responsibly towards Israel. I fear that means that those kinds of efforts will be behind the curve, and what will end up making a difference is developments on the ground. And if you're not moving political diplomatic solutions, you're going to see either violence, which no one wants, or you're going over time to see that the Arab and other regional actors will increasingly take a more assertive approach, whether that's in sanctioning, whether that's in diplomacy, or whether that's in military terms. Because one of the outcomes of these past few days is rockets on Tel Aviv. How is that good?
Right.
How does that play out well? And it's that kind of short-sighted thinking which is very sad to behold, but it's leading in a very dangerous direction for Israel. And people who claim to care about Israel and then do everything to defend the status quo are going to really have to be in the dock as this thing continues to go south.
Daniel Levy, Director of Middle East Affairs for the European Council on Foreign Relations and Senior Fellow at the New America Foundation. Thanks so much for giving us your time today.